Syrian government attacks on Turkish positions in northwest Syria are driving Turkey deeper into the country's civil war, prompting it to send reinforcements to the region and press for a Turkish-controlled military zone there. Syrian troops killed 8 Turkish soldiers and a civilian contractor last week and 5 more soldiers on Monday. Backed by Russian bombers, Syrian forces have encircled several Turkish observation posts in the northwestern province of Idlib, posts established by agreements aimed at reducing violence. Turkey, which supports Syria's opposition forces, has pushed back, pummeling the advancing Syrian units with artillery and killing dozens of Syrian troops and allied fighters, according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, a London-based war monitor. A Syrian helicopter was shot down on Tuesday, reportedly by rebel forces. The surge in fighting, as the Syrian government tries to retake the country's last rebel-held province, has created the largest displacement of people in the war's 9-year history. About 700,000 people have fled their homes in Idlib since December, the United Nations said Tuesday. Many are living in tents near the Turkish border, and there have been recent reports of children freezing to death. The crush at the border has unnerved Turkey, which has already taken in 3.5 million Syrian refugees. The Syrian offensive could push another 3 million civilians into Turkey, Turkish officials fear, with 10,000 armed militants among them, some linked to al-Qaeda. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says the country can take no more and has threatened military action to stop the Syrian advance. Since then, Turkey has massed 30,000 troops and armor at the Syrian border, and sent 5,000 reinforcements to bolster troops deployed in Idlib province.
Ahmed is hunkered down, praying for his life after an airstrike nearly killed him while filming for Sky News. His camera's been destroyed. He films on his phone as the fighting continues around him. In a lull, he takes his chances to run somewhere safer. This is thought to be footage of the airstrike a little earlier that nearly killed Ahmed, but did take the lives of 2 Turkish soldiers. On Skype, he told us he was certain it had been a Russian warplane.
المرصد عم يحكي انه طيران روسي في اجواء النيره بقميناس بعد مباشره حصل الانفجار. الرمايات كانت متكرره بشكل كثيف جدا تستهدف المنطقه، عمليه تمشيط على المنطقه بشكل كامل، وطيران الاستطلاع الروسي كان متواجد فوقنا في الاجواء.
It matters a lot because this is potentially a major escalation if a NATO member country's troops have been attacked and killed directly by Russia. And it highlights the dangers ahead as Turkey continues sending its forces deep into Idlib, and Russia continues blocking any efforts at the UN towards a ceasefire.
I think it's cynical of the Russians. I think it shows the lack of humanity. They will have seen the same footage and the same scenes that you've shown your viewers, and yet they don't want to do anything to try and protect civilians.
Hundreds of thousands of people are now cornered in camps, pressed up against the Turkish border as the Assad regime closes in a war that targets civilians.
They're not just asking for tents and blankets, they're asking for safety. This is not a war in which civilians are simply being caught between 2 different armies. This is a war in which the civilians themselves are under attack. It's a war on an entire population. It's a war on children.
The world has wrung its hands, apparently impotent to stop Syria's carnage for almost a decade. But over this border is a killing zone where millions are now trapped. At this 11th hour, will it now act? Dominic Waghorn, Sky News, on Turkey's border with Syria.
We have witnessed repeated violent confrontations between Turkish and Syrian government forces. For its part, the Russian Federation is actively engaged in support of the Syrian government's military operations.
UN Special Envoy offers a bleak view of the political crisis in Syria, which in turn has resulted in a devastating humanitarian situation that continues to deteriorate on a daily basis. Close to 1 million displaced people being squeezed into an ever-decreasing space by advancing front lines on all sides.
I am getting daily reports of babies and other young children dying in the cold. Imagine the grief of a parent who escaped a war zone with their child, only to watch that child freeze to death.
Many members contend the crisis is a direct consequence of Russian support.
Can only end with a plea to our Russian colleague to stop the support of Syria. If you tell the Syrians that there is no longer military support to the Syrian regime, they will have to stop the onslaught on their own population.
To my German colleague, we will not stop supporting the legitimate government of Syria, which is conducting a legitimate fight against international terrorists.
How can you justify carrying out such indiscriminate and inhumane attacks? What are you doing to uphold international humanitarian law? What are you doing to protect the people who are fleeing? Where do you expect those people to flee to?
And another question posed by the US ambassador.
The question I asked before the Council today, then, what will tomorrow's headline be? And what are we going to do about it?
The answer today, as it has been on so many occasions in the Security Council before, nothing. The Security Council has been deeply divided since the very beginning of the Syrian conflict. Russia has wielded its veto on 14 occasions, preventing any form of united Security Council action. In the face of what is becoming the greatest humanitarian crisis of the 21st century, the international community appears unable to act, political interests continuing to take priority over the suffering of millions of civilians.
Turkish troops in Idlib have been asked to expand their military outposts. Their presence here is the result of an agreement between Turkey, Russia and Iran 2 years ago to establish safe zones. But these Turkish soldiers might soon get involved in the biggest military campaign of their deployment. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has warned a military operation is imminent.
On the subject of Idlib, Turkey has made all preparations to carry out its own operational plans. As with every military operation, on this subject, I'll say we could enter Idlib suddenly one night.
Undeterred by the Turkish warning, the Syrian army is stepping up its offensive. Government warplanes struck the town of Termanin in Idlib. The attacks have intensified over the last few days. Earlier this week, President Bashar al-Assad said in a rare address that his troops won't halt their campaign until Idlib falls into their hands. Talks between Russia and Turkey to defuse tension have stalled. Each side is accusing the other of failing to implement the terms of de-escalation in Idlib.
The key agreement on Idlib was to separate the Syrian armed opposition, who cooperates with Turkey, from the terrorists. The terrorists, according to the agreements regarding Idlib, must not be involved in a ceasefire regime.
Russia considers Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, an alliance of rebel groups in Idlib, a terrorist organization, and therefore excluded from the ceasefire agreement of 2018.
Turkey seems to want the Syrian government troops to go back to the areas behind the demilitarized zones, but for President Assad, such zones are no longer relevant since his army has advanced further into Idlib and taken over more territory. If there's no agreement by the end of this month, the chances the escalation in the fighting might turn into an outright war between Syria and Turkey.